I wonder if we might pray using the words of Moses at the beginning of the song. May my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like gentle rain upon the tender grass and like showers upon the herb, because we ask it in the name of the Lord Jesus. Amen. Well, our question for this morning is this. What is the one thing that we need to remember? The church that I serve has quite a high turnover. Perhaps yours is similar. And one of the problems that we have faced over the last 12 months or so is what you might call a lack of institutional memory. We don't quite know how to put a guest event on anymore. We don't quite know how to run a weekend away, or move the chairs, or find new leaders. We used to be pretty good at those things. For years, there was this chain handing on from one year to the next in a handover, but the chain has been broken and we've forgotten. I think it's one of the reasons why this last year has felt quite so exhausting. It feels like we need to remember everything. What do we most need to remember? What compounds the issue is the way that these last few years have been so disruptive for the world and for the UK and for Europe, but also for us. Of course, the times are always a-changing, and it's human nature to think that the present moment is especially turbulent, but it certainly hasn't been a very stable moment for our constituency, such as it is. As we know, individual ministries have fallen, some of them quite publicly. Whole networks and organizations have been under the most unbearable strain. Relationships have been frayed and broken. And the future? Well, who knows what the future of summer camps or student ministry or evangelical presence in the Church of England really is? Is everything about to bounce back to the way it was? Or is it changed forever? It certainly has the feel of a pivotal moment. And when everything is up in the air like that, when you can't quite work out what the landscape is anymore, when the future suddenly feels not just uncertain, but unguessable, what do you most need to remember? Of course, whatever has happened in our churches and in our constituency has also happened in individual lives. Deaths, isolation, loneliness, shattered relationships, and amidst it all, the ever-present deceitfulness of sin. I have more than one friend whose entire world has collapsed since the last time that the EMA met together in person. When worlds fall apart, what do we most need to remember? Well, we're in Deuteronomy 32. As we just saw, it's a song that the Lord gave to Moses and to Israel specifically so that they would remember, and remember in the midst of overwhelming turmoil. More than that, it's a song that was given to confront them as a witness, an unforgettable vehicle for a truth that they'd forget again and again. If you like, it's a time capsule that the Lord designed for a shallow burial, lying just under the surface, in the topsoil, unforgotten in Israelite mouths, even when their God was forgotten in their hearts, ready to confront them again and again with the one thing that they needed to remember, a scalpel song designed to cut through 1,000 years of forgetfulness and bring people face to face with the truth, ready to confront us here this morning as we step blinking into the sun. The song divides up into four. There's an introduction in verses 1 to 6. There are then a three-step unfolding of Israel's future through their beginning and the conquest of the land in verses 7 to 14, into their apostasy and the judgment of exile in 15 to 27, and then through to the Lord's relenting and the prospect of return in 28 to 43. But throughout those three phases, the one thing that the Lord wants them to remember is this. Deuteronomy 32, verse 1, "Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. May my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, like gentle rain upon the tender grass, and like showers upon the herb. For I will proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God, the rock. His work is perfect. Remember the rock. Firstly, remember the life-giving rock. Moses begins by going right back to the beginning. And verse 7, remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. What follows is the most beautiful picture of the Lord's fatherly care for his people. Let's pick it up at verse 10. The Lord found him in a desert land and in the howling waste of the wilderness. He encircled him. He cared for him. He kept him as the apple of his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that flutters over its young, spreading out its wings, catching them, bearing them up on its pinions, the Lord alone guided him. No foreign god was with him. He made him ride on the high places of the land, and he ate the produce of the field, and he suckled him with honey out of the rock and oil out of the flinty rock, curds from the herds and milk from the flock, with fat of lambs, rams of Bashan and goats, with the very finest of the wheat. And you drank foaming wine made from the blood of grape. It's a beautifully tender picture of the Lord's kindness, isn't it? An eagle fiercely guarding, tenderly fluttering over his nest. A rock that gushes out streams of honey and oil. A father gently nurturing his sons and his daughters. The song, it paints with a broad brush, impressionistically. The picture is of Israel found, nurtured, encircled, raised in the wilderness, and then guided into an overflowingly rich land. Exodus and the wilderness and the promised land all swept together into this one image of the Lord's life-giving provision, a flowing, foaming, bubbling rock. It isn't hard to hear the backwards echoes, not if you know the book of Exodus anyway. When Israel first arrived at Horeb, the rock of Sinai, and this was their first experience of the mountain. Before it was ablaze with fire or a hiding place in the storm, the rock of Horeb was struck with a staff, and it flowed. It flowed with water, and they drank. It's an image that's taken from their past. But Moses and Joshua are singing of their future. And when they enter the land, the rock, not Sinai, but the God who came down at Sinai, the rock will flow with honey and with oil, with wheat and with bubbling, foaming wine, lavish provision, all from his storehouses, all laid up with him. And this song will confront them. Is he not your father who created you, who made you, who established you? The abundance around you, it is all from him. The song confronts us, surrounded as we are by God's lavish provision. Do you remember? Do you remember the rock? Do we? Remember the life-giving rock. The problem is that they won't. As a point of historical fact, they don't. There are a twisted and crooked generation. And so the flowing rock will become a fiery rock. Secondly, remember the judging rock. Verse 15, but Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, stout, and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. Verse 18, you were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth. It is a shocking picture. They are Jeshurun, verse 15. Jeshurun, the upright one. But now Jeshurun has become twisted and crooked. They were the apple of the Lord's eye, verse 10. Do you know that phrase, the apple of the Lord's eye? It's literally the little man of his eye. You know, if you stand so close to someone that if you really looked, and if you had a high enough resolution photograph, you'd be able to see the figure of your reflection reflected in their pupil. You'd be a little man in their eye. Well, that is what Israel was to the Lord. And yet, still so close that they are reflected in God's eye, they kick. They forget him. They forsake him. They provoke him to jealousy with their foreign gods. And so the overflowing streams are replaced by fire, verse 22. For a fire is kindled by my anger, and it burns to the depths of Sheol, devours the earth and its increase, and sets on fire the foundations of the mountains, and I will heap disasters upon them. I will spend my arrows on them. They shall be wasted with hunger and devoured by plague and poisonous pestilence. Again, it's not hard to hear the backstory here. Back in Exodus, as the ink was still drying on the wedding certificates, when Moses was still up on the mountain receiving the commandments from the Lord, Israel fashioned strange new gods, a golden calf, and they turned to worship it. And the Lord was provoked to anger and to fire. Did you know that as Moses strode down the mountain to confront the people, the mountain, the rock behind him, literally blazed with fire? I hadn't realized that until I did my quiet time in Deuteronomy 9 the other week, and realized that when Moses remembers the scene, that's how he describes it. The mountain behind me blazed with fire. The rock that had flowed with water, now ablaze in judgment. You see, it's another image taken from Sinai. But this is still a song about their future. What happened at Sinai will happen again. They will turn from the rock. They will forget God. They will bow down to idols. They will incur God's anger. It will be a pattern. It will happen again and again. But this isn't just a pattern. It is a prediction. And the national history of apostasy will see the Lord unleash the fire of exile. The blazing rock will sell them into the hands of their enemies, famine and pestilence and swords. And when that happens, 700, 800, 1,000 years down the line, this song will be there to confront them, just as it confronts us. Do you remember? Do you remember the rock, the blazing rock? Don't you see that it was all from him? The fire as much as the flowing water, judgments as much as generous provision. Do you remember the rock? It could be the end, couldn't it? But the song doesn't end there. Sinai didn't end with fire, and neither will their future. I remember the life-giving rock, remember the judging rock, remember the relenting rock. Actually, the turning point comes at verse 26. I would have said, I will cut them to pieces, I'll wipe them from human memory, had I not feared the provocation of the enemy, lest their adversary should misunderstand, lest they should say, our hand is triumphant. It was not the Lord who did all this. And from here on in, the whole direction of the chapter shifts. To begin with, the focus shifts from Israel and their foolishness to the foolishness of her enemies. Verse 28, for they, and the adversaries, are a nation void of counsel, and there is no understanding in them. It might sound like we're still talking about Israel, the corrupt nation. Actually, though, we're not. As you read the following verses, it becomes clear that it is Israel's enemies that are now in view. Verse 29, if they, that is the now victorious enemies, were wise, they would understand this, why they're temporarily winning. They would discern their latter ends. How could one of those adversaries have chased 1,000 Israelites and two have put 10,000 to flight unless Israel's rock had sold them and the Lord had given them up? For there, the nation's rock is not as our rock. Our enemies are by themselves. Their vine comes from the vine of Sodom. Israel's folly was their failure to realize that all of their victories and all of their fatness came from the Lord's. And their enemies have committed the same error, gleefully cashing in on the Lord's abandonment of his people, without ever realizing that they owed it all to the rock. The tide has turned, Israel's enemies are now in view, and by verse 34, there is complete reversal. Verse 34, is not this laid up in store with me, sealed up in my treasuries? Vengeance is mine and recompense. For the time when there the adversary's foot shall slip, for the day of their calamity is at hand, and their doom comes swiftly. For the Lord will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants when he sees that their power is gone and there is none remaining, bond or free. Complete reversal. Compassion for his people and atonement and joy. Calamity and doom for their adversaries. A day of vengeance, a year of recompense, and ultimately joy and atonement and life. This is about the relenting rock. You might hear the echoes of that third great Sinai moment, the greatest of all the Sinai moments. The flowing rock had become the fiery rock, but then Moses interceded. Actually, he reminded the Lord what his enemies might think if he wiped Israel from human memory. And the Lord relented. It's the same word as verse 36. The Lord had compassion. And Israel came back from the dead with a hope and a future. The burning rock still burned, but now there was a hiding place. And Moses hid there as the Lord passed by and proclaimed his name, the Lord's, just as Moses proclaims it here. Remember the relenting rock. But this is not just the past. This song sings the future. What happened at Sinai will happen again. There is a path through judgment to healing and life. There is a hiding place. There is compassion and forgiveness if you'll only remember the rock. Verse 39, see now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God beside me. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal, and there is none that can deliver out of my hands. It is the starkest confrontation of all. Don't you see that I am God? Don't you see it now? Don't you see that it was all from me? There is no other. And what the song does is to drive us to the one thing. Strip it right back, boil it right down, draw together the theology and the philosophy of history and the commandments and the promises into one white-hot singularity, one central truth, and this is it. See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God beside me. I kill, and I make alive. I wound, and I heal. There is none that can deliver out of my hand. See me and rejoice. There's no getting away from the confrontation. It is brutally powerful. To get to this point, you have to acknowledge the folly and the twistedness of all your turnings. You have to see that the pain of exile and defeat was all from him. You have to feel the heat, the rightness of the rock's blazing anger. It is very confronting. But if through all of those things you will only finally see that he is God's, well, there is hope. I kill and I make alive. I wound and I heal. Remember the relenting rock. So let me ask, do you remember? Do you remember the rock? It is brilliant, isn't it? And the Lord who gave this song is brilliant. You might think that it would be hard to capture the heart of those first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis and Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, in just one word. Surely the Exodus and the covenants, creation and tabernacle, wrath and atonement, promise and law, they're too much for a single picture. And they probably are. But this one picture captures all you really need to know. If you can only remember that mountain, that stunning visual aid of the God who came down at the mountain, flowing streams, and a furnace of fire and lightning, and a cleft in the cliffs, you've got the main thing, a multifaceted visual aid of the real rock, the spiritual rock, the Lord's. This one hook is strong enough to hang a whole theology, a whole history on. Remember the rock. It is so raw, isn't it? Moses doesn't mention his mediation. He doesn't mention Abraham. He doesn't mention the covenants. He doesn't mention the commandments. There is something more properly basic than any of those things. The one who stands behind them all. Remember the rock. It is a breathtakingly simple vision of history. Do you want to understand the gift of your homeland? Do you want to understand the Assyrian incursions, derelict cities, Babylonian hordes? Do you want to understand a life in exile? Do you want to get a handle on an unguessable future? Do you want to understand pandemics and invasions and fallen heroes and civil war? Do you want hope? Well, remember the rock. It is all sealed up in my treasuries. Where do you think your history comes from? Where else the future? The thing that is so brilliant about this song is the way that it travels through time with them, with us, in their mouths, ready to confront them when they most need it. And my wife, Jenny, loves the musical Hamilton. I enjoy it. Jenny loves it. Here's the difference. I've watched it 2 or 3 times, and I'd watch it again. Jenny watches making of documentaries, and she reads blogs, and she knows the lyrics, and she understands the choreography. Her favorite dancer, I'll just pause there, she has a favorite dancer in Hamilton. Her favorite dancer in Hamilton is the Bullet. I didn't even notice this part, but Jenny pointed it out to me. There's a dancer who represents the bullet that will eventually kill Hamilton. If you've not seen it, that's not a spoiler. You get told at the beginning. And this dancer, the Bullet, she's there the whole way through the play. And she keeps coming back, just missing, and then going off stage. And then coming back again. Until eventually, having whistled through the whole play, she has her moments. And she takes center stage. And she hits her targets. This song is the Bullet, a time capsule, a truth bomb, a weaponized theological shell fired at the beginning of Israel's history, whistling through the generations, always there as Hannah and David and Asaph and Ethan and Isaiah and Habakkuk sing the rock, a truth bomb ready to explode, a time capsule waiting to be unearthed, ready to confront them with their gods, until eventually, having whistled through their history, the author of this song has his moments and takes center stage and hits the targets. See now that I, even I, am he, and besides me there is no gods. Do you know it is absolutely deliberate that as Jesus confronts a crooked and twisted generation, it is these words, these Deuteronomy 32 words, that he takes on his lips. The one who is speaking to you, I am he. When you've lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he. Whom are you seeking, Jesus of Nazareth? I told you, I am he. See now that I, even I, am he. And beside me there is no gods. It was a moment of all-out confrontation. A generation who could not recognize their Lord even as they stared him in his face, the little man of his eye, and the Lord's who wouldn't back down. What you need to realize, he said, what you need to remember, what you need to see is me, your future, your life, your hope, your atonement is me. It's all me. Remember the rock. And so do we? Do we remember? Do we see? At the end of the day, do we actually believe in God? It is possible that we don't. In our own lives, we can certainly grow fat and kick, drink in the Lord's goodness without acknowledging him. We can think that the extraordinary blessings that we enjoy in his presence are really the result of our own initiative and striving. Truth be told, you'll know this, we can do the same in our churches. Look at what we have built. Look at the work of our hands. Do you remember? We can forget out of despair. It's all been too much, too hard, too unsettling. And in the overwhelm, we stop seeing clearly. Do you remember? In our ministries, we can be so caught up trying to remember how to recruit members and find leaders and organize events and fill schemes that we think that those things are the real key. We can buzz around our favorite causes and banners, whether that is retrieval or expository preaching or contextualization or mercy ministries. We can flock to our networks. We can try to bolster our alliances, Renew and FIEC, Redeemer, and even, dare I say it, the Proclamation Trust. It's easy enough to fill a calendar and a strategy meeting and a budget. But none of those things are the one thing. They're not the real key to our past, and they're not the secret key to our future. No, that is the Lord's, and the Lord's alone. It is all in his hands. Do you see? Do you remember? All of our past, all our present, all our future, all our provision, and all of our hope. The hard times and the good times, the calamities and the consolations. Do you see that it is all from him? Do you actually believe in God? Do you remember? Actually, I felt this from a few angles this term. In my quiet times in the opening chapters of Deuteronomy, my preparation on Deuteronomy 32, a training session that I attended, someone else gave it, on the Sermon on the Mount, a book that I read on preaching. A number of angles, but all driving in on this one question, the fundamental question, the thing that underpins everything else, the way forward when everything is collapsing and when the future is unguessable, the key to the future and the present and the past is this. Do you see? Do you remember? Do you actually believe in God's? And if you have forgotten, as I find that I sometimes do, this song is rain on your dry grounds, dew on the tender herb, water and spirit and life. See now that I, even I, am he. All your goods, all your joy, your only future as your path is in me. Remember the rock.